Every Halloween, my husband Devin turned our home into a walk-through haunted house. Each room had a different theme, usually horror movie inspired. Our neighbors loved it. Every year, Devin planned something more and more elaborate. We were even in the local news a couple years back when we did that big Stephen King themed display. I've always enjoyed Halloween, but for Devin, it was a real passion. He spent most of the year drafting out plans and working on decorations in the garage. I loved that he was so passionate about something, especially because he never forced me to help out. This year, I didn't even know what the theme was. I never asked and he never told me. Despite all the hours he spent working in the garage, he hadn't shown me a single one of his new creations. By the beginning of September, I finally asked to see what he'd been working on. He excitedly brought me into the garage, which had been transformed into his Halloween workshop years ago. Fake stone altars and pillars leaned against the walls, each decorated with bizarre symbols and gibberish letters. The table was covered with metal chains and wires. There were a lot of decorations in the workshop, but none of them seemed particularly Halloween-related. No skeletons or creepy dolls or fake cobwebs. He must have been going for a theme I didn't quite understand. He led me to his most recent project, the only real decoration that seemed to fit the Halloween theme, a 7-foot-tall goat demon statue sitting on a jagged throne. That seemed pretty creepy. Based on the statue and the weird symbols, I assumed he was going for some evil cult theme. I didn't want to ask him though, because if I expressed too much interest, then he might ask me to help. So I just told him everything looked wonderful and spooky, and I left. At the time, I didn't have any feelings about it one way or the other. I personally preferred his funnier themes, like the year we made our backyard into the spaceship from Killer Clowns from Outer Space. But I couldn't judge his decorations until he finished putting everything together. On October 1st, he started laying out all his new decorations. I made a rule years ago that no decorations would come up before October. Otherwise, we'd be a Halloween house all year long. When I got back home from work that day, he'd already finished the porch and front yard. Our house had been transformed into some kind of satanic church, with empty pews on the grass, a sacrificial slab in the center, and the goat demon ruling over it all. It wasn't the scariest display he'd ever made, but it was certainly the most unnerving. The fake red symbols on everything gave it a weird kind of authenticity, and even in the sunlight, the goat demon was genuinely creepy. I had mixed feelings, obviously, but I appreciated that my husband was really thinking outside of the box this year. I went inside to congratulate him on all his work, but he was too busy scurrying around the house to stop and talk to me. He had cleared out all of our furniture. I wasn't sure where he put it, and he'd drawn more of those symbols on all our walls. At the moment, he was laying out short stone columns, making the living room look like some unholy temple. I didn't like to bother Devin when he was in the zone like this, so I went outside to take a walk. Mostly, I was just curious what the neighbors thought. Normally, we received instant positive feedback. This time, all the neighbors ignored me. Their silence spoke volumes. Eventually, I ran into my neighbor Leanne, who was probably the most religious person in our block. She looked me right in the eyes and begged me to tear down our decorations. I told her that I would never do that to my husband. "He's planning something," Leanne said. "Look at the symbols." I told her she needed help and left. When I got back home, Devin had calmed down. He'd finished the living room and kitchen and would get to the rest tomorrow. I made him dinner, but since he cleared out the furniture, we had to sit on the floor and use one of his fake stone slabs for a table. He asked me what I thought, and I was honest with him. I told him that the neighbors didn't seem to appreciate this year's theme. "So what?" he said. Later that night, while Devin was in the shower, I took a photo of one of his decorations and did a reverse image search on Google. The symbol was Assyrian, and it represented blood. I did the same thing to two more symbols. One meant madness and one meant autumn. According to Google, all these symbols were found in the Last Star commune, that death cult in Oregon from a few years back. 40 people lived on that commune, stopping all communication with the outside world. When the authorities finally came to check them out, all 40 people were gone. All that was left were empty buildings and those same symbols. I was genuinely surprised that my husband had decided to use the symbols from a real-life tragedy. No wonder the neighbors were offended. I really didn't want to meddle with Devin's vision, but I had to talk to him. I pulled him aside and asked where he'd gotten the idea for his theme. I expected him to level with me, but he got really cagey and said that a little birdie told him how to decorate. I didn't press the issue. Clearly, he wasn't going to tell me. For the next week, he kept adding more to his display. Pretty soon, all our walls were covered with those symbols, even in our bedroom. It was driving me crazy. And worst of all, Devin didn't seem to be having any fun. He had turned manic, obsessively adding to the decorations without really enjoying himself. He barely even talked to me anymore. The neighbors avoided us both. Our decorations had made us into pariahs in the community. The only person who still talked to me was Leanne, but that was only to beg me to tear down the display. 3 days before Halloween, I heard Devin grunting outside our living room window. I went outside to see what he was doing. He had added metal spikes to the front yard. They jutted out of the lawn in different directions, making our yard look even more off-putting. "Please stop," I told him. "This has gone too far. No one likes these decorations. I definitely don't." "Not until Halloween night," he said. I couldn't accept that. I grabbed the metal pole out of his hands. He pulled it back. We struggled for a bit, the first real fight we've ever had. He was much stronger than me, though. I let go. I didn't want to fight my own husband. But he was pulling backward at the time, and when I let go, he stumbled back. His arms spun around him as he tried to maintain his balance, but it was too late. He fell right on top one of the new spikes. It skewered him right through the stomach. I screamed in horror. The police came very quickly after that. I assume one of our neighbors called them. They checked Devin's body, but he was already dead. Then they asked me a few questions, decided it was an accident, and left with the body. I was now all alone, surrounded by my dead husband's horrible markings. That was when Leanne approached. She gave me a big hug and told me that I was better off now. "You've been cleansed," she said. I didn't understand until that night, when I was looking through Devin's phone. The police hadn't taken that away. I looked through his messages and found a text conversation between Devin and Leanne. She was the one who sent them those symbols. It was her idea all along. But why? It made no sense. I charged out of the house and walked straight to Leanne's place down the street. She was sitting on her porch, acting like she expected me to come. "So, you found out," she said. Then she looked around to make sure no one could hear us. She whispered, "Long live the last star."
I was struggling with the luggage, I admit it. The suitcases weren't even that heavy, but the combination of jet lag and nerves made them feel like lead. As I tried to drag them up the plush-carpeted staircase, I could feel the sweat gathering on my forehead, trickling down the back of my neck. My shirt clung to my skin in a way that made me feel both embarrassed and frustrated. "Stop dawdling and get that luggage up the stairs," my wife, Emily, called over her shoulder with a sigh. She didn't even look at me when she said it, her voice laced with exasperation. I'd only been married to her for a few weeks, but it already felt like I was failing her. Every look she gave me was colder than the last. Why had I let myself believe this could work? Sorry, they're very heavy, I managed between breaths. I felt like an idiot. Other guests glanced at me with pity, but none of that stung as much as the dismissive way Emily looked at me. This was supposed to be our honeymoon, but it felt like a test I was already flunking. Well, before I could gather my strength to haul the bags the rest of the way, a voice cut through the awkward tension. "Would you like some help there, sir?" I turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man, looking like he stepped out of some magazine ad. The kind of man who made someone like me feel smaller. "We can't keep that lovely lady waiting all day, can we?" he added, with a wink in Emily's direction. I hated him instantly. "I can manage," I said quickly, trying to ignore the way Emily was practically glowing at the stranger. But my arms were aching and I was losing grip on the bags. Emily rolled her eyes, making no attempt to hide her frustration. "Honestly, Jack, let the nice man help you," she said, flicking her hair back and offering him a flirtatious smile. I felt my chest tighten, but what could I do? The man, Damien, as he later introduced himself, scooped up the suitcases like they weighed nothing and flashed Emily another charming grin. I trailed behind them, feeling like an extra in my own life. By the time I got to our honeymoon suite, I was exhausted, physically and mentally. Emily didn't waste time before flouncing off to the pool, leaving me to wallow in my misery. "I'll be back soon, darling," she had called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I knew where she was really going, to flirt with Damien by the pool. I lay in bed, too tired to even be angry, just hurt. Maybe she never wanted me. Maybe she had only married me out of some misguided pressure from her family. They loved me, but she barely tolerated me. I tried to close my eyes, convincing myself I'd feel better after a nap. That's when I felt it. Something crawling under my shirt, skittering across my skin. I sat up, startled, and slapped at it instinctively. My hand came away with blood and a stinging sensation on my ribs. Lifting my shirt, I saw the bite. A nasty red welt already forming, yellow pus seeping out of it. It reeked, and the skin around it felt hot. Whatever had bitten me wasn't normal. I swore under my breath. Of course, this was my honeymoon, after all. The one place where things could only go from bad to worse. I lay back down, hoping the pain would fade. But it didn't. Instead, I felt a strange, tingling sensation spread through my body. The world around me began to blur, and I realized with growing panic that I was losing consciousness. My last thought before everything went dark was that Emily would probably be happy if I never woke up. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, the room was dark. My vision was hazy, and for a moment I thought I was still dreaming. But then I realized that something was different. The pain was gone. The welt had vanished. I sat up in bed feeling oddly energized, more alive than I had in years. My skin felt strange, though. Cooler, tougher, as if it had thickened overnight. And then I noticed it. Something moving beneath the surface of my skin. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but no. Something was definitely crawling just beneath my flesh, wriggling and shifting in an unnerving dance. Panic surged through me. But then, as if by instinct, I willed it to stop. And it did. What the hell had bitten me? The next day, I watched Emily from a distance. She was down by the pool again, giggling with Damien, pretending like I didn't exist. I felt the anger building in my chest, but it wasn't the usual helpless rage. No, this time I had power. I could feel it, crawling just beneath my skin, waiting to be unleashed. I followed them, staying in the shadows as Emily and Damien slipped away to a secluded spot behind the hotel. The way they laughed, the way he touched her arm, something inside me snapped. I felt my heart pounding, but not with jealousy. No, it was something colder, darker, a sense of finality. The game was over. I wasn't here to plead for her attention anymore. I wasn't here to fight Damien, to throw a punch and storm off like some foolish, jealous husband. I was here to finish it. They didn't even notice me at first. Emily was all smiles, her fingers grazing Damien's arm like she had forgotten I existed. I let them have their moment, knowing full well it was their last. As I stepped forward, Emily finally caught sight of me. Her face twisted with annoyance, as if I was interrupting some private fantasy she didn't want to be torn from. "Jack, what are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice carrying the sharpness of someone who no longer cared to hide their disdain. Damien looked me over, sizing me up with that smug smirk he always wore, the one that told me he thought he'd won. "Hey man, relax," he said, flashing me a patronizing grin. "We were just talking." I didn't respond. I just stared at them, my blood simmering beneath the surface. There was a time when I would have yelled, thrown a tantrum, maybe even tried to swing at Damien just to feel like I was doing something. But not now. This was different. I was done playing the fool. "I don't have anything to say," I said quietly, my voice steady. "You'll see soon enough." Without waiting for their response, I turned and walked away. They wouldn't understand what I meant. Not yet, but they would, soon. When I got back to the room, Emily still hadn't followed. I didn't care. I had something more important to deal with. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I pulled out her phone, which she had carelessly left on the dresser. My hands shook slightly as I scrolled through it. Not because I was nervous, because I already knew what I'd find. I just needed to see it with my own eyes. And there it was. Photos. Private, intimate ones. Emily and Damien, locked in embraces that she'd never given me. Their messages were wild. A running commentary of their secret affair, full of dirty stuff. The way they talked about me, like I was nothing. Like I was some pathetic obstacle in their way. My chest tightened, and for a brief moment I thought I might be having a heart attack. I felt the room spin, my vision blur. But I steadied myself. I couldn't lose it now. Not yet. The rage that surged inside me wasn't the kind that made you scream or punch walls. It was the kind that made you cold, calculating. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply opened her photo gallery, selected the worst of the images so private that they would ruin her and Damien in ways I could barely comprehend, and uploaded them to her social media accounts. Every platform she had, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, one by one I posted the pictures. No caption, no explanation, just the raw, ugly truth for the world to see. As the notifications started pouring in, I could almost picture the chaos unfolding. Her friends, her family, her colleagues, every single person who had thought Emily was this perfect, untouchable woman would now see her for what she really was. And Damien? He wasn't going to walk away clean either. By the time Emily came back to the room, her face flushed from sun and flirtation, it was already too late. She hadn't checked her phone yet. She had no idea what I'd done. But when she saw me sitting there, calm and collected, something in her expression shifted. Maybe she sensed it, the quiet finality in my demeanor. "Jack, what's going on?" she asked, her tone a mix of irritation and uncertainty. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked to the door. Before leaving, I glanced back at her, at the woman I had once thought I loved. The woman who had destroyed me without a second thought. "You'll figure it out soon enough," I said, my voice cold, almost distant. And then I left. As I walked through the hotel lobby, I could feel my phone vibrating in my pocket, the messages coming in one after another. Friends asking if I was okay. Family concerned. I ignored them all. I didn't need their sympathy. I didn't need anything from anyone anymore. I had already won. By the time Emily realized what had happened, by the time she tried to pick up the pieces of her shattered reputation, it would be too late. The damage was done. And for the first time in months, I felt free. I had taken everything from her with just a few clicks. And the best part? No one could ever accuse me of laying a hand on her. My revenge was clean, precise, and irreversible. I didn't need to see the aftermath to know that her life, and Damien's, would never be the same again. I had made sure of that.
I remember that night so vividly. The night I first met Jennifer. It was late, nearly midnight, and I was sitting alone in a dimly lit bar, nursing a whiskey and trying to forget the latest breakup that had torn my heart apart. The place was nearly empty, save for the bartender cleaning glasses and a few regulars lost in their drinks. Then, she walked in. She was stunning. Long, dark hair that flowed down her back like a waterfall, eyes that shimmered with a mysterious depth, and a smile that could melt away even the darkest thoughts. She sat next to me without hesitation, ordering a drink with a confidence that caught me off guard. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice soft and soothing. I nodded, too surprised by her presence to speak. She didn't pry, didn't push, just sat there, her company somehow calming. That night we talked for hours. She was everything I had ever dreamed of. Beautiful, kind, and so full of life. By the end of the night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A connection, a spark. We exchanged numbers, and from that moment, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Our relationship blossomed quickly. It felt perfect, almost too perfect. Every date was magical. Every conversation left me wanting more. But as time passed, I noticed something off. Jennifer never slept. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting by the window, just staring out into the darkness, her face illuminated by the pale moonlight. When I asked her about it, she'd just smile, that faint, almost sad smile, and say she wasn't tired. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just a night owl or someone who didn't need much sleep, but the longer we were together, the stranger it got. Her skin grew paler, almost translucent, and her eyes darkened, the vibrant sparkles slowly fading into something hollow. She moved with a sluggishness that made her seem exhausted, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. But whenever I asked if she was okay, she would dismiss my concern with a gentle laugh, telling me not to worry. One night, after a particularly eerie encounter where I found her standing in the middle of the living room, staring at nothing, she told me she needed to go to her mom's house for a while. I was concerned, but she insisted she'd be fine. I wanted to push her to stay, to tell me what was wrong, but something in her eyes made me stop. I told her I'd miss her and to call me when she got there. But she never did. Days went by, and I heard nothing. My calls and texts went unanswered. Each passing day felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my gut. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The fear gnawed at me, consuming every thought. Finally, after 5 agonizing days, I decided to call her mom, desperate for any news. When I introduced myself, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know you," her mother said, her voice shaky and uncertain. I was confused. I'm Jennifer's boyfriend, I explained, my heart pounding in my chest. We've been dating for a while now. There was silence. Then her mother whispered words that shattered my world. Jennifer died 4 years ago. I felt the ground slip from beneath me. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend what I just heard. No, that's impossible, I stammered. But her mother was insistent. Jennifer had died in a car accident 4 years ago, she said, her voice breaking with sorrow. My head spun, memories of the past few months flashing through my mind. The late nights, her pale skin, her sad smiles. It all began to make a twisted, horrifying sense. I hung up without saying goodbye, the phone slipping from my hand as I collapsed onto the couch. For days, I locked myself in my apartment, drowning in despair and confusion. How could this be possible? How could I have fallen in love with someone who didn't exist? I sank into a deep depression, plagued by anger and loss. I couldn't even bring myself to step outside, afraid of the world, afraid of the truth. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, I felt a presence. I opened my eyes and there she was. Jennifer, standing by the window, just as she always had. But this time, there was something different. Her skin glowed faintly, her eyes soft and warm. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice like a breeze. I didn't mean to hurt you, I didn't want to be alone. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Tears streamed down my face as I watched her. Slowly, she walked over to me, placing a cold hand on my cheek. You were my last wish, she said, her voice barely audible. I just wanted to feel alive again, even if only for a little while. And then, just like that, she was gone. The room felt empty, colder somehow, but there was a strange sense of peace that settled over me. It hurt, knowing I'd never see her again, but in that moment, I knew she had found her peace too. I live in a small town, and pretty much the only option I have for shopping is Walmart. What I really dislike is how many people I run into there. The place is always packed, and because my town is so small, I always end up running into ex-classmates and people that I don't really like. I'm not the most social person in the world, and I'm really bad at small talk. The other day I was at Walmart to pick up some vegetables. I knew exactly what I wanted to get, so I figured I'd be in and out in less than 10 minutes. I'd use the self-checkout line and I'd be gone before I ran into anybody. Unfortunately, when I got to the produce section, I instantly saw Jane. Jane was a girl I knew in high school, and back then she made my life miserable. She was the stereotypical cheerleader type, even though our school was too small to have a cheerleading team. But you know the type. She was pretty and bubbly and passive-aggressive. I remembered she'd always say these backhanded compliments whenever she saw me, like, "Oh, you've lost weight," or "That haircut is much more flattering than your last one." Honestly, she was terrible. And that day she was standing right next to the bananas, which was one of the things I really needed. I didn't have any other option. I had to go up and see her. I walked to the bananas, pretending like I didn't notice her, and angling my body in the other direction so she couldn't see my face. But of course she recognized me right away. "Oh, Jennifer," she said. "Hello." I smiled at her and said, "Hi, it's great to see you, but I gotta run." I grabbed the bananas and tried to leave, but she literally grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "What's the rush?" I didn't have an answer, so I just said, "Oh, you know, I just gotta get back home." "You don't like shopping here either?" she said. "Not at all," I told her. I was surprised that she wasn't insulting me. We actually had something in common. And then she said, "Oh, I figured you'd shop at Walmart all the time, you know, because of the deals." And there goes the insult. She was calling me poor. Normally I'd just take it and leave, but this wasn't high school anymore. We were two grown women. She shouldn't talk to me like that, so I said, "No, it's because I always run into the trashiest people." She flinched for a second. I could tell she was offended. Good. So I picked up the rest of the fruits and vegetables and left. Because I was feeling so proud of myself, I decided to treat myself to the discount cookies in the bakery section before I left. Why not? I had just rounded the corner when I saw a thin old man clutching his heart and gasping for breath. His face was all contorted and he looked like he was having some kind of heart attack or something. Unlike most of the other people at Walmart, he didn't look familiar. But even though I didn't know him, he was in trouble. I shouted, "Call 911!" And then I ran to him. By then, he was already on the floor, making the most terrible noises through his mouth. His eyes were rolled back in his head. I held him in a sitting position, careful to make sure his head didn't flop backwards like a newborn baby's. "Just breathe," I told him. "Someone's going to call an ambulance." He opened his mouth and started to gasp out a single sound. G-g-g. "It'll be okay, you don't have to say anything," I said. And then he finished that sound with a sentence. "Give me all your money." And just like that, he wasn't sick anymore. The whole thing was an act. He'd only pretended to have a heart attack so that he could trick someone like me into getting close enough for him to attack. With one hand, he held onto my wrist. With the other, he held out a long syringe that he'd kept hidden in his pocket. He pressed the tip of the needle against my arm skin, but he didn't push it in. Not yet. He was waiting for me to give him my money. I had to do what he said. I had no idea what was in that needle. My purse was hanging off my shoulder, so I lowered my shoulder down so that the purse would slide off. That way he could grab it and leave me alone. As I slid the purse toward him, I looked around at all the other people in Walmart. There were so many people here, and yet no one was doing anything to help me. They could tell that someone was attacking me, but they just stood there and watched. I knew that at least one of them called the police, but that didn't help me right now. Right now, I needed someone to hit him and pull him off me before he could inject me with whatever chemical was in that needle. All these people that I knew, that I grew up with, and yet none of them was willing to just jump in and risk their own safety to stop this crazy person. He let go of my wrist and grabbed my purse. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said, "Thank you. Now don't move. You won't feel a thing." I couldn't believe it. I'd given him what he wanted, yet this guy was still going to kill me? Just because I tried to help him? "Please," I said. "Just take my purse and leave." Suddenly, someone came from the side and kicked the man right in the head. It was Jane. Her foot collided with his temple and he flew backwards. The syringe fell out of his hand and landed with a clatter on the floor. Jane was a typical housewife. She was probably 100 pounds soaking wet, and yet she was on him like an MMA fighter. She pummeled him over and over, kicking and hitting until he didn't move. By the time she let him go, he was unconscious and the police had arrived. One cop took my statement and explained that this man had been roaming around the area, injecting people with deadly chemicals. They'd been looking for him for weeks, and thanks to me, they'd caught him. I told the cop that I had nothing to do with it. It was all Jane. I walked over to Jane and thanked her. Her knuckles were bloody, and she was still out of breath. "Do you want to have coffee sometime?" I asked. "Sure," she said.